Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 9 of The Classical Republican. Today we're starting a trilogy of videos on Machiavelli. So, to start, unless you've read more than The Prince by Machiavelli, I want you to just forget everything you've heard about it. Just throw it out the window. Now, many intelligent people think they know about Niccolo Machiavelli, but do not. There is a video on YouTube. It's an interview with Harvey Mansfield, the great professor. And apparently he used to teach a college course on The Prince. And so in this interview, he talks about Machiavelli and talks about him in that light of The Prince. So, in reality, those weren't his views. He was a classical Republican who served and fought for the Republic of Venice. So let's get started. Machiavelli lived from 1469 to 1527. Now, so he lived and served in the Florentine Republic. Let's talk about republics. You have contemporary republics at this time, like Venice, Genoa, Pisa, Amalfi, Ragusa, which is not in Italy, but still a republic. Gaeta, Ancona, Noli, Lucca, San Marino, and Florence. He served his republic from 1498 to 1512. So remember those dates. I'm going to give you some more context. He served as a defense official and also as an ambassador. So he was involved in making war and peace for Florence. So in 1494, the Medici are kicked out. Now the Medici, you'll hear Florence referred to as a republic before and after this time. This time, which I'm speaking of, is 1494 to 1512. This is the period of time when the Medici were not involved. For centuries before, and then centuries after, the Medici were involved, and they were the people calling all the shots. Now, even though they were not monarchs until much later, they were not. They were the people in charge. Even though there were Republican organs and bodies actually functioning in that city, they weren't functioning without the go-ahead, without the nod, the wink from the Medici. But in 1494, the Medici were kicked out of Florence. You had a monk, a clergy member of the Catholic Church, Savonarola, and he had been preaching against corrupt influences. And so not only the Medici, but also the Pope at the time. So he was successful, and the Medici were overthrown and kicked out of Florence. And because Savonarola was still talking about the Pope, he just wouldn't shut up. And so eventually the powers that be got rid of him, and a man named Soderini came to power. And he was, even though a lot of these offices only lasted a year, people would be elected again and again and again. And so Soderini was pretty much in charge from 1498 all the way to the end in 1512. And Machiavelli served in many different capacities during that time. So during that time, you had the Italian wars. You had Caesar Borgia, and Machiavelli was working, was on assignment, talking with a lot of these people. Caesar Borgia, he was going to other Italian city-states. He was going to France to meet with the king of France. He met with the Pope. He met with the Holy Roman Emperor. But I do not believe that he ever went to Venice. And Florentinians at this time didn't have a very good idea about how the Venetian government worked. And so there are scholars who believe that there were people who believed that there were Florentinians who wanted a Venetian style regime, but didn't always understand, especially at the beginning of the real republic in the 1490s, didn't really understand Venice, but came to a better understanding later on. So the end of the Florentine Republic is in 1512, and everyone is run out who was working in that regime, and so that includes Machiavelli. So Machiavelli does the Cicero thing and decides to turn to writing. And he writes a lot. The first thing he writes is The Prince. Now, why did he write The Prince? There's a lot of suggestions to show that ethics can be separated from politics. Now that's a good guess, because definitely he is showing that politics doesn't necessarily have anything to do with ethics, and he's speaking from experience. He was hanging out with the King of France, the Holy Roman Emperor. I mean, Caesar Borgia and the Pope at the time. That they were not heavily wedded to ethics. Now, other ideas is that it was a job interview, because here the Medici were back in power and they were trying to hold on to power, and he said, hey, you could give me a job. I will be your advisor, because I know how people hold on to power, how princes hold on to power, and that's what you are. You're a prince, because we're not a republic anymore. That's one idea. That's actually a very prevalent idea. A lot of people think it is a job interview. But if you read, there's also another one. The communists, the early 20th century communists, Antonio Gramsci, believed that he was trying to educate the people and show the people, like, this is how things actually work. And so you need to engage in that type of behavior. And so he saw the Communist Party as the prince. But if you listen to Maurizio Veroli, he would say that it's written in the back at the end of The Prince. And what Machiavelli is doing at the end of The Prince is saying that we need to unite Italy. And it needs to be the Medici. And so, if you get you need to use these principles that I have shown you in The Prince and use them for a greater good of unification of the Italian peninsula, which hadn't been a thing since the fall of the Western Roman Empire. So, and that's the interpretation that I agree with, because he goes on to write a bunch of other things that discount what he wrote in The Prince. So the next one, so he wrote The Prince in 1513. In 1517, he writes the Discourses on Livy, on the first 10 books of Livy. And so the first 10 books of Livy is about the downfall of the monarchy in Rome and the rise of the Republic. So, in the Discourses, he really just talks about, republicanism, classical republicanism, and that's what he believes is the best form of government. He talks about about good citizenship, about the mixed regime, and the importance of institutions and the protection of liberty, the importance of virtue. An empire of laws and not of men, checks and balances. He also talks about citizen militias, and equality. And so these are things that are very important to him, and are important to a properly ordered republic, which is what he wants. So then he goes on to write The Art of War. And The Art of War really emphasizes the citizen militia over the use of mercenaries, which was the common practice back in the day. If you wanted to go to war, you didn't really bring it up with your citizens, because they weren't going to have anything to do with it. You were going to raise money and go hire a bunch of mercenaries, best mercenaries you can find. And so that's what everybody did back in the day. And even Venice was doing it back then. They did it with their army, but not with their navy. And that's one of the critiques that he has of Venice, which I'll get into another video on that'll be my third video on on Machiavelli's critique of Venice, which will be coming out soon. So he writes The Art of War in 1520, and he's talking about things that he has firsthand knowledge of. In fact, he defeated Pisa with a citizen militia in 1509. This is also written in a dialogue, which is very, very classical. He talks about battlefield tactics, and a lot of that is kind of an updated version of old Roman army tactics. But this is at the dawn of handheld firearms in Europe, so he kind of updates it with the use of firearms. He also talks about defenses. And a lot of that is very similar to what I saw when I was in the military, the U.S. military, and everyone was preparing for battle in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I don't think that this is used by military planners. Maybe somebody got a hold of it and used it during the early 21st century, but they use it. They seem to use it in the design of FOBs, forward operating bases, in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so a lot of the ideas are seem to have been used or at least rediscovered during the early 21st century. So, Machiavelli continues to write, plays and history, and it never really gets back in. Well, not really. Gets back in with the powers that be in Florence. There seems to be some coming around. Some trust in him. He's not exiled anymore, but he'll never hold a position of power like he did under the Republic again. So, that's all I have on Machiavelli today. Like I said, I have 2 more videos coming out, and so I hope I was able to change your mind if you're not already a Machiavelli expert. I hope you understand now that he was a really good guy. and he was a good classical Republican. And that's all I have today for from the classical Republican. Long live the Republic.